Hi everyone, this is a video discussing the Case Study Portfolio Assessment Report Assignment. This will be a report that you'll be creating based on the results of the Global Achievement Assessment that you did previously for your case study student for EDSE 613. So a disclaimer before we get started, the sample evaluation report that you're about to see won't fully cover everything that is required for this assignment. The requirements for this assignment are pretty comprehensive, and it is best practice to include all of this information. But the sample report that you'll see will just kind of give you a starting point and somewhere to jump from. We'll talk through in this video the expectations for the assignment itself, point by point. So first thing to look at would be the assignment description. So you've got the student that you did the Global Achievement Assessment with previously, and this will be an opportunity for you to write up the results. So you've already turned in the protocols, you've turned in the score report, test record documents, etc., student response book, and this could be either for the Woodcock-Johnson or for the Wyatt. We're going to talk through the Woodcock-Johnson right now, and for the Wyatt, just know your report will be quite similar. I'm just going to be summarizing the categories of the test a little bit differently. So you'll find the manual that you've been using for all the instructions for your assessment to be quite helpful when it comes to the report, because the report will need to describe the various subtests and composites and what they entail. We'll see some information about that in the example. Remember, if you are using the Wyatt, you'll just build this based on the Wyatt information, but the structure of the report will be the same. So here it's expected that you'll do a written summary and analysis of the results of your Wyatt or your Woodcock-Johnson. And this is what we need in the report. This will be a written report addressing identifying information. So obviously you're keeping this anonymous for your case study student. You can go ahead and include false information here just to show that you know what would be necessary for the report. And this would be obviously age, grade level, all of what you're diving into here, so that if another person were reading the report, they would know the main idea: who is this student, how old, what are we kind of looking at for age and grade level here. And then we'll be going into the scores. So after you do the identifying and background information, who is this? What has led us to the assessment, for instance, is something that you could put into the report when you're in the field. This is an initial evaluation to determine eligibility for special education, for instance, due to concerns in areas of X, Y, or Z. That's something you could put if you were doing a special education evaluation in the field. But the identifying information and background information for this assignment is just going to be that kind of demographic content. And then we're moving into the assessment results. So this you'll be pulling straight from your online score report. It will all be there for you, whether that's the Wyatt or the Woodcock-Johnson. And the main values that we're looking for here would be standard scores. And then you'll see that under SS in most reports. Classifications. So is that standard score average, high average, low average, etc. And percentile ranks, and that'll go along with your standard scores and classifications. And this is all so that practitioners, but also families, of course, parents and guardians, can best understand the results of the evaluation. And as the student is able, depending upon the student, we want the student to be able to understand as much of this as possible also, so that they can understand areas of strength and areas for growth. So we can work through that with the student, especially as they get older and are working more on that self-advocacy, self-determination, and involvement in the IEP process. So here, the final part of the assignment description just takes a look at summaries of findings. So what's the main idea here? Overall conclusion of the evaluation. Really, we're looking at reading, writing, and math, right? If we want to boil it down, there's a lot that goes into that, such as fluency, for example, but main focuses for these global assessments would be reading, writing, and math. So what are our conclusions regarding those outcomes, and what do we recommend in the classroom setting? So I'm just going to show you an example here. This is a student who did score, we'll see some variety here, but some of these scores are pretty low. So we do see a lot of areas for growth here and some areas of strength. Obviously, this will be the case for any student with or without an IEP. We have those relative strengths, relative weaknesses, or areas of challenge. So this is the Woodcock-Johnson report with name hidden here. We've got our various clusters or composites. We have this subtest listed. This is just for not the extended battery, but just the basic Woodcock-Johnson subtest. So we've got age and grade equivalent included on the report, but what we really want to look for this assignment would be the standard score and the percentile. So PR, looking at percentile, SS for standard score. And here we can see we do have some variety. As I mentioned, we've got some lower percentiles, but we do have some areas of strength. For instance, letter word identification emerged as a relative strength for this student. So this is the sample evaluation report, and feel free to pause your video if you want to look through this text. You're not going to want to copy and paste this word for word into your report, because you're writing the report in your own words to indicate that you do understand the content, you have mastery of it, and know what you're writing about. But this will give you kind of a template to start from and just a structure, so to speak. So as mentioned earlier in this video, this report doesn't include every single thing that needs to go into the assignment. For instance, you'll notice that percentiles are not included in this write-up, so that's something you would want to include for this assignment. This assignment includes standard scores, and you want to put in those qualitative descriptors of these scoring categories when you're writing up the report as well. So again, this is just a place to start, kind of look through what this entails. We begin with a little brief description of the test, and remember, we're writing this report ultimately for parents and guardians, and although they may be very familiar with the Woodcock-Johnson or the Wyatt, we need to make the assumption as we write this report that they've never seen this before. Many families have not, and that's because they're not trained in special education evaluation. And so this is our opportunity to explain to them what we're doing when they sign consent for testing. What are we looking at, and what does it entail? So we do introduce right at the top the scoring categories for standard scores. This is a beautiful thing for us to include as we begin, because then as we go through this write-up, each one of these references is going to be providing a standard score for the sections that we're talking about. And it'll be a good point of reference for a family member to look back at and say, oh, okay, so this is a relative area of strength or an area for growth. So I'm going to blow up the size of this just a little bit. Writing through, this is false name, but Harry was administered this Form A, 11 subtests, and then we're including broad achievement and talking through the variation. Obviously, as mentioned, there are strengths and challenges. So remember, we've got these standard scores. You will want to pop in the percentile as well as the qualitative labels, and the assignment refers to those as classifications. So that would be SS 72, you can see here the low range, so they can see that qualifier, because to many parents or guardians, standard score might not be quite as meaningful yet, and they're learning to interpret those based on this scoring information at the top. So here in the report, we identify that reading emerged as an area of strength in some areas, or in some categories for the student. So we've got the overall reading, and then moving or adding in the fluency, we include the broad reading standard score. And this moves us into the low end of low average. So we see that fluency is a challenge for the student. We're talking through the scores for each of the subtests. And then we do identify a significant area of weakness in fluency. So we'll see for this student that fluency is a challenge. And you'll notice some of that qualitative observation, that detail integrated here. So for example, we have, this is what the sentence fluency test requires Harry to do. And then to circle yes or no, you guys will recognize that. So mentioned here in the report is that he worked very slowly on the test, reading out loud to himself, demonstrating difficulty in processing the meaning of the statements before making a decision. His responses were all accurate, but the pace was very slow with this timed test. So because this is evaluating fluency, we're seeing standard score of 64, and up we go to interpret that. Very low, right in that area, lower than the 70 to 79 measure of low. So we do have examples as well for oral reading. I include that there are 4 substitutions, saying a different word in place of the actual word. So we want to identify or define that term for the parent or guardian reading this report, in case they're not familiar with it yet. And an example is that the student said pollution instead of pollination. So we've got that detail included here. Moving down, broad reading, falling into the low end of the low average range. And we've got all the components of the reading assessment taken into consideration there for broad reading. So then we just identify, do these scores that is expected will demonstrate age-appropriate abilities, but may demonstrate difficulty in reading accurately with fluency. So we've got average scores in some areas, but then the challenge with fluency. Moving into mathematics, similar information. We do identify another concern with fluency here for this particular student. So we've got math calculation skills in the low range of the standard score of 59. So this is a significant area of challenge. But math facts fluency standard score would be 50, which is low. So that is a quite low standard score as we've scrolled up and taken a look at those classification categories. These can be hard to write, you guys, and maybe in the tests that you've been doing during this course, your scores, perhaps the child scored more in the average range or even in the high average range for some subtests. Obviously, this is a report written, and we're seeing some significant difficulties for this one. This can be hard to communicate to families because it can be frustrating or difficult to hear that information and see those really low standard scores. We did include a grade equivalent here, for instance, just to provide some more context for the family. But it is really important, although obviously we do it in a very professional and respectful manner, to be clear about the results of the assessment, because it is the right of the family as well as the right of the student to know what the areas of strength and challenge are. So yes, we play upon those strengths, we capitalize on those, we drum them up and encourage students about those abilities and those relative strengths. But we do need to be honest and straightforward regarding areas of difficulty as well, because that really brings us to the needs drive goals drive services model, and it just shows the family that we're building those goals around those areas of weakness or areas for growth is a way that we might word that in order to keep that growth mindset focus. We have listed here math subtest conceptual gaps, including percentages, long division. So that's going through that section, looking for areas of weakness, problems that the child got wrong. And then to say he struggled with some operations previously instructed on in the 9th grade math class, and several problems where the student said, I don't know. So then we talk about in the classroom, the student may struggle with basic calculation skills, and we say what the student is capable of or not in these areas right now and how we can support growth. As mentioned previously, the report that we're looking at doesn't include fully everything that is needed, so I will supplement this right now by saying these are the findings and overall conclusion, but this report does not focus as much on instructional recommendations, so you will want to include that. For instance, use of visuals, the appropriateness of an extended time accommodation to make sure that the child is supported if fluency is an area for growth. And all of that is information that can be included in the written report to provide a body of evidence as we're creating an IEP if the student is eligible. So we do talk about the difficulties for the child with focus. We do have the writing section here at the bottom, and this is a low average range. This is a relative area of strength for the student in comparison with math. So you'll notice the way this was structured is reading was an area. Up here we have a score in the average range. We have low average score. Math obviously was the hardest or lowest part for this student, so we included that in the middle. And then we wrapped up with writing, which is a stronger area in comparison for the student. So that's just kind of a strategic development of this report where we hit on some stronger areas, then we talk about what was lowest or most difficult, and then we're ending on a more positive note as well. Obviously, it depends on the report. We won't necessarily always structure it that way, but it's just a little hint or a tip. Included more qualitative behavioral observations like difficulty sitting still, kicking of the chair while working or listening to directions, random use of phrases during the testing, and reading almost all problems out loud to himself, asking unrelated questions to the administrator. So here we've got included the standard scores just to wrap up the write-up. And you'll see areas of strength, areas of weakness are indicated here just to find those most significant high scores versus lower scores. So that's an example of the report. Remember, this report doesn't contain everything you'll need to do, but it is a good place to start. And we've talked through those additional requirements as well.